She was about to close another quiet night at the community theater when a voice from the audience made her freeze on stage. It was just one line, a line no one else could know, except him, her son, missing for 11 years. What would you do if the person you lost suddenly left you a sign in the most unexpected moment of your life? Before we begin, tell me, where in the world are you watching from? Drop it in the comments. I read everyone. It was just past 7 p.m. in Bozeman, Montana, and the temperature had dipped below freezing. A soft veil of snow danced beneath the street lamps, swirling with the evening wind. The small theater at the edge of Main Street, the Emerson Playhouse, glowed dimly in the dark like a secret it never quite told. Yellow lights buzzed softly above the carved wooden doors, their edges worn smooth by time, and inside, the smell of old velvet and pine lingered like a ghost from the past. Rachel Moore stood alone behind the thick red curtain, her hand clutching the frayed headset at her ear. Her breath was steady, but her eyes betrayed her. She wasn't watching the stage. She wasn't focused on the lighting cues. She was staring at seat H9, fourth row center. An empty seat until last week. And now, every night since then, a stranger sat there. Hood pulled low, arms folded, never applauding, never reacting. Except for one moment, the same moment every night. Rachel's heart clenched with something she couldn't name. It wasn't fear, not quite. It wasn't even hope. It was something more haunting, a recognition that she couldn't explain. Outside, the storm was growing heavier. Snow tapped gently at the windows like fingers that wanted in. The heater moaned in protest, and somewhere backstage, a sound echoed, the familiar creak of the prop room door, but no one had touched it. She knew. That creak wasn't from tonight. It was from memory. The same sound the day her son vanished. The same prop door Daniel used to hide behind when they played during rehearsals. She could almost hear his giggles beneath the stairs. But the sound never came, not anymore. Daniel had disappeared 11 years ago, 8 years old. Red hoodie, green backpack with a dinosaur patch. Last seen on his way to rehearsal after school. He never made it. The streets were checked, the rivers searched. Posters flooded every pole from Bozeman to Billings. Nothing. No body, no trace, no goodbye, only silence. And then a seat. Seat H9. And the voice. Rachel squeezed the headset tighter, bracing herself as Act 2 began. The cue line was coming, the one that always made the stranger lean forward, always made him murmur. Tonight she was ready. Even the moon waits for the boy who knows her name. It echoed across the stage like a spell, spoken by the young lead actor. The audience hushed, and then, from the crowd, a whisper, just one voice, quiet, raspy. Male. Even the moon. Rachel's knees almost gave out. It was the exact intonation Daniel used to use when he was little, when he ran around the kitchen quoting her scripts. It wasn't just the line, it was the rhythm, the pause, the breath before the last word. She froze. The voice didn't match his age anymore. It was deeper, older, but the echo of her son's cadence was unmistakable, like hearing a lullaby you'd only ever sung to one person. And she had. She stumbled back from the curtain and sat on the wooden stage floor, her breath fogging in the cold backstage air. Behind her, the play moved on. Actors delivered lines, lights shifted, applause built. But Rachel didn't hear it. All she heard was that voice. After the curtain call, she waited near the lobby doors, coat thrown over her shoulders, but seat H9 was already empty, just like every other night. Rachel, Jenna Wallace, the theater manager, approached, concern in her voice. "You okay? You look pale." Rachel tried to form words, but none came. Instead, she nodded vaguely and stared back at the stage, now dark, silent, and empty. Just like her home, just like her heart had been for over a decade, But that voice, that line, that was his. The next morning, Rachel sat in the small kitchen of her home just off Olive Street. The sun barely pushed through the frost-covered windows. She held an old cassette recorder in her hands, one Daniel used to play with. Still worked. Barely. She rewound the tape to the exact point. Pressed play. Daniel's voice, age 7, reciting his favorite line from one of her earliest plays. Even the moon waits for the boy who knows her name. It was him, older now, wiser, scarred, maybe, but it was him. And if he was alive, if he had come to that play, if he had whispered that line back to her, why didn't he say anything? Why had he just watched? A knock came at the door. Rachel startled, heart racing. She hadn't been expecting anyone. When she opened it, a small envelope was on the mat. No name, no return address. Just a single word written across the front. Remember. She opened it with trembling fingers. Inside was a torn photograph. Her, Daniel, sitting on the edge of the theater stage, the same stage from last night. He was in the red hoodie. She was holding a script, but the photo had something else. It was folded in half, and on the back, written in red ink, were 5 words. Seat H9. Until it's safe. Rachel dropped to her knees. She didn't sleep that night. Instead, she sat on the couch with her old journals spread around her, each one filled with pages of Daniel's drawings, scribbled lines, things he used to say. She tried to find clues, connections, a name, a place, a sign. She thought she had buried this obsession years ago, but obsession doesn't die, it hibernates. And now it was awake. The next performance was Friday night. Rachel didn't go backstage. She didn't direct. She bought a ticket. Seat H8. Right beside him, the theater was full. She sat, her hands shaking, scanning each person who passed her row. And then, just before the lights dimmed, someone slid quietly into H9, tall, hooded, silent. Rachel didn't turn, but her throat clenched. And when the line came, even the moon, she didn't wait for him to whisper. She turned to him and said it out loud. Knows the boy who named her? He didn't react, not at first. But then, barely, he turned to her. Their eyes met, and he smiled, just for a second, a crooked, broken smile. Then the lights blacked out for intermission, and when they came back, he was gone, again, but on her seat was a folded paper napkin from the lobby, and in smudged ink, 4 more words. Meet me Sunday, alone. There was a photo on the refrigerator that Rachel Moore never took down. It had yellowed at the corners, the ink slightly faded by sunlight and time. In it, a younger version of herself knelt on the edge of the theater stage, arms wrapped around a laughing little boy with wild, dark curls. His sneakers were too big, his smile too wide. And in the background, just out of focus, hung the deep red velvet curtain of the Emerson Playhouse, the same curtain Rachel still walked behind every Friday night. The boy in the photo was Daniel. He had just turned 7. Rachel remembered the moment like it had happened last week. That day, she had finished rehearsals early and let Daniel crawl onto the stage while she finished cleaning props. He climbed to the top of a stack of stage crates, stood tall, and raised his arms like a king addressing a silent court. Then, in that mischievous, playful tone he loved, he delivered the line she'd written in her first play. Even the moon waits for the boy who knows her name. He shouted it like it meant everything, and for her, it did. Now Rachel stood in the same kitchen, 13 years older, but somehow more tired than aged. The kettle whistled gently on the stove. The morning sunlight pierced through the blinds in soft bars. She moved slowly, always careful with her steps. Not because she was clumsy, but because some part of her, a quiet part, always feared the phone might ring while she was away from it. that a knock might come while she was pouring coffee, that someone might say the words she'd rehearsed, hearing for over a decade. We found him. Rachel Moore was 42, a history teacher at Bozeman High by day, a part-time director at the Emerson Playhouse by passion. She had lived in the same craftsman-style house since the year Daniel was born, a one-story home with blue shutters and a white porch swing that creaked when the wind got strong. She never moved. She couldn't. Somewhere in her mind, she always believed that if Daniel ever returned, somehow against logic and odds, he would come here first. Her ex-husband Mark had left 6 months after the disappearance, not out of cruelty, out of grief. They had tried therapy. They had tried silence. Nothing worked. Mark needed to forget to survive. Rachel needed to remember. She kept Daniel's room almost exactly as it was. Dinosaur wallpaper on one side, the Daniels Galaxy glow-in-the-dark stickers above the bed, and a half-assembled Lego rocket on the desk. The calendar was still on November 2012. Every year on his birthday, Rachel baked the same chocolate cake he used to love, the one with peanut butter frosting and crushed pretzels on top. And every year she placed one candle on it, lit it, closed her eyes, and whispered, "Come home." At school, Rachel was known for her storytelling. Her students said she could turn a Civil War battle into a movie scene or a Dust Bowl speech into something that made you cry. She never used PowerPoint. She used her voice, her pacing, her pauses. Some said she should have been an actress. Others thought she had been one. But no one ever asked about her son. They all knew. And in a town like Bozeman, you learn what not to say. The only person who still asked year after year was Jenna Wallace. Jenna had been Rachel's friend since high school. The two of them had co-founded the youth theater program, taught summer camps together, and shared enough late-night wine to last a lifetime. Jenna had been with Rachel the night Daniel disappeared. She was the one who called the police while Rachel ran through the street screaming his name. Now, Jenna helped her survive, quietly. "Did you sleep at all?" Jenna asked one morning as Rachel unlocked the theater's side door. Rachel hesitated. "A few hours." "You're going to drive yourself crazy if you keep chasing shadows." Rachel turned. "It's not a shadow. It was his voice. I know it." Jenna didn't argue. She never did anymore. But Rachel saw it in her eyes, that same exhausted sadness, the kind that says, "I love you too much to keep watching you break like this." Rachel had learned to live in fragments. Her life was divided into before and after the day Daniel vanished. Before was laughter, theater, cartoons at breakfast. After was cold coffee, missed holidays, and silence that never ended. But that voice, that line, it had cracked something open, and now the questions were louder than the quiet ever was. She sat that afternoon in Daniel's room, cross-legged on the rug, flipping through a notebook he used to scribble in. He had filled it with drawings of stars, aliens, rocket ships, and a stick-figure version of her that always had a coffee cup in hand. On one page he'd written the same sentence 4 times in shaky, childlike print. "I want to be in a play with Mommy." Rachel traced the words with her finger. Then she whispered, "You were always in the play, Daniel, always." That night she returned to the theater after hours, alone. She walked down the aisle, past the rows of red velvet seats, until she stood in front of seat H9. It looked just like the others, nothing special, no marks, no carvings. But when she reached beneath the seat, her fingers brushed something, a piece of string. No, a bracelet, green and yellow woven yarn. Her breath caught. She had made one just like it when Daniel was in 2nd grade. He wore it every day until it broke. She lifted it slowly into the light. This wasn't the same bracelet. But the knot, the colors, the pattern, it was his. Rachel didn't go home that night. She slept backstage on the old couch behind the costume racks, clutching the bracelet like it was a lifeline. And when she woke, she made a decision. She would go back through everything: the investigation, the interviews, the CCTV footage, the reports that had been filed, and the ones that had never made it into evidence, because if Daniel was out there, if he had come to the theater, if he had left a message, then maybe he was trying to come home. The days that followed were colder than usual in Bozeman. The sky turned a dull shade of gray that never seemed to lift, and the snow piled along the sidewalks like untouched memories. Rachel Moore barely noticed. She was too busy looking for something no one else believed was there. She started with the bracelet. Jenna didn't recognize it. Neither did the costume crew, the stagehands, or the student volunteers. It hadn't come from props. It hadn't been lost in a coat pocket or left behind during rehearsal. Rachel took it home, placed it in a small wooden box on her nightstand, the same one where she kept Daniel's old pacifier, his first lost tooth, and a ticket stub from the last movie they ever saw together. Then came the second sign. It was a Monday afternoon. Rachel had just finished teaching a unit on World War II when her phone buzzed. Unknown number. Montana area code. She almost didn't answer. But something made her press the green button. Hello? Silence. Then a single phrase, whispered, rushed, "Don't trust the stage manager." Click. Rachel stood frozen in the middle of her classroom, the hum of the overhead projector still in the background. Her students had just left. The room was quiet, too quiet. She checked the number again, disconnected. Jenna? No. Rachel had known her since they were teenagers. They had been through everything together. And while Jenna could be intense, direct, and at times infuriatingly logical, she wasn't capable of a lie this deep. Was she? Rachel pushed the thought down. She had to. Still, she began to watch. And that's when she noticed something odd. Jenna had keys to every room in the Emerson Playhouse, but she never entered the prop room anymore. Instead, she sent volunteers, claimed her knee hurt, said the stairs were too much. But Rachel had seen her climb them just fine last month. Why lie? A few nights later, while the rest of the staff was cleaning up after the matinee, Rachel stayed late and snuck into the prop room. It was cluttered. Boxes of old scripts, broken mannequins, a box fan from the 80s still with cobwebs clinging to the blade. She stepped carefully over a cracked stool and opened an old metal drawer. Inside, lighting gels, a cracked mirror, and a Polaroid. She pulled it out slowly, heart racing. It showed the backstage hallway from years ago, before the repaint, before the new carpeting. Standing in the middle of the hallway was a boy in a red hoodie. His face was turned. She couldn't see his features, but the way he stood, the small hands at his sides, the tilt of the head. Rachel sank to the floor. The next morning she brought the photo to Noah Grant. Noah had once been a rising star in local journalism, writing long-form profiles and digging up cold cases. He'd covered Daniel's disappearance obsessively when it first happened. Then, like everyone else, he moved on. But not entirely. He now worked part-time at a small independent paper and drove an old Subaru that smelled like takeout and printer ink. Rachel met him at the Bozeman Public Library. She slid the photo across the table. He studied it, lips tight. "Where'd you find this?" "Prop room." "You sure it's Daniel?" Rachel nodded once, firm. "It's him." Or it was. Noah leaned back. "The photo's old, really old. This is pre-2013, maybe even 2012. But here's the thing. This hallway angle, you can't get that shot unless someone had access to the utility corridor." Rachel blinked, which means whoever took this photo was behind the walls. They returned to the theater that evening under the pretense of filming an archival video about the building's history. Jenna, unsuspecting, gave them access. Rachel noticed she avoided eye contact the entire time. Noah led her to the old utility corridor, long sealed off from the public after a renovation 10 years prior. They found the hatch behind a stack of old chairs. The door groaned open, revealing a narrow space between walls. Dust filled her lungs instantly. They followed the corridor to a small wooden door at the end. Inside, a cramped observation nook hidden above the main stage. It had a small square cut into the wall, big enough to see through. Someone had been watching. On the ground, a pile of items, crushed soda cans, candy wrappers, and a notebook. Rachel picked it up with gloved hands. It was newer, not from years ago, pages filled with scribbles, some just lines, others fragments. Don't tell her. Seat H9. Even the moon. Her chest tightened. Someone's been living here, Noah whispered. Rachel nodded, then flipped one more page. There, in rough handwriting, I remember her face. The notebook shook in her hands. She could barely hold it. Noah took photos of everything, promised to run them through old case records, look for handwriting samples, and cross-check Daniel's childhood assignments. Don't get your hopes up too fast, he warned. Rachel didn't reply, because her hope wasn't fast. It was patient. It had waited 11 years for a sign. Now it had 3. 3 nights later, the third sign came. During a tech rehearsal, one of the student actors, Kyle Benson, slipped on stage and twisted his ankle. Rachel drove him to urgent care, and while they waited for the x-rays, she tried to distract him. "You've been with the theater long?" Kyle shrugged. "Few months." "Where are you from?" "Billings." "You ever act before?" "No, not really. I just needed a job." She smiled. "Well, you're good with lights, and fast." Kyle looked away. "Yeah, fast." Something about his tone made her pause. His hoodie, gray, with faint red stitching near the sleeve, almost like initials had been removed. She made a mental note. Later that night, she asked Jenna about Kyle's application. There wasn't one. "Jenna," Rachel said carefully, "how did we hire him?" Jenna looked annoyed. "He showed up, said he was looking for volunteer hours. We needed help." He was polite. "No ID?" "I didn't press it. You know how short-staffed we've been." Rachel nodded, but inside, a storm was brewing. Who walks into a community theater, asks for a job, and ends up handling lighting cues for a production he's never seen? And who wears a hoodie stitched with red thread? Just like Daniel's? Rachel returned home and opened the old family computer. She dug through the archived folder marked Daniel School Projects. She opened a file titled My Favorite Place. Inside, a scanned drawing, a stick figure boy on a stage next to a red curtain, a square cut in the wall above. "Mommy can always see me from up there," the caption read. She gasped. The nook, the spy hole. Daniel had known it. Had he been taken there? Had he returned? Was Kyle? No. He looked older, different. But what if? She needed more. Something stronger. DNA. That weekend, she returned to the prop room alone. She found Kyle's hoodie on a chair. Inside the pocket, a cough drop wrapper, a receipt, and a crumpled napkin with a name written in childlike handwriting, Danny M. Rachel dropped it. Her legs buckled. Danny, not Kyle, not really. Noah rushed the sample to a contact in Helena. Unofficial testing, quiet, private. 2 days later, she got a call. No voice, just a text. 98.7% match. It's him. Rachel dropped the phone. Tears poured down her cheeks as she sank to the floor. Daniel was alive. He had been here. He had stood on her stage. He had whispered her words. And now? He had disappeared again. The confirmation should have felt like a finish line. But it didn't. Because knowing Daniel was alive and watching her only raised more questions. Why hadn't he revealed himself? Why use another name? Why leave clues instead of coming home? Rachel stared at the DNA report on her desk, the numbers still swimming in her vision. 98.7% match. It was him. But the paper didn't say where he'd been, or what had happened to him, or who had taken him in the first place. She met Noah in the corner booth of a quiet diner just off 7th Avenue. Snow flurries ticked softly against the glass, and the smell of burnt coffee filled the air. Noah looked exhausted. "You're sure it's him?" he asked, voice low. Rachel slid the report across the table. "His name is Daniel, my Daniel." Noah read silently, then nodded. "Okay. Then we're not dealing with a mystery anymore. We're dealing with a secret." They mapped out everything, from the day of the disappearance to the day Rachel heard his voice at the theater. Timeline, locations, people. Rachel kept returning to one thing, the odd behavior of Jenna, the missing application, the fact that she'd had access to every room, every record, and the prop room where the photo had been found. But it wasn't just Jenna. There was someone else. Rachel remembered a man who used to work security at the theater back in 2012. His name was Victor Lanning. Quiet, kept to himself. He was let go a few weeks after Daniel vanished. "Budget cuts," they said. Noah raised an eyebrow. "That feels too convenient," Rachel agreed. They tracked Victor down to a small mobile home on the outskirts of town. The man who answered the door had aged heavily, deep lines beneath sunken eyes, fingers yellowed by tobacco, voice like gravel. He didn't recognize Rachel at first, but when she said her name and her son's, he flinched. "What do you want?" he asked, already stepping back. Rachel held out the photo of Daniel in the hallway. "Did you take this?" Victor's eyes narrowed. Then he whispered, "You weren't supposed to see that." Inside his trailer, Victor poured cheap whiskey into mismatched mugs. The walls were plastered with old movie posters and unpaid bills. Noah kept the recorder running under the table. Victor spoke slowly, reluctantly. "I didn't take him. I didn't even know what was happening. Not really. But I heard things." Rachel leaned forward. "What kind of things?" Victor glanced at the window, then back. Voices, late at night, behind the walls. Jenna and someone else, a man, tall, wore a green scarf, always met behind the stage. What were they talking about? A boy, always the boy, said he was special, said he had the memory. Rachel's stomach dropped. "What memory?" Victor shook his head. "Don't know, but after the kid disappeared, the man stopped coming. Jenna got real quiet, and I got fired." Later that night, Rachel sat on the edge of her bed, Victor's words looping in her mind. The memory. She opened Daniel's old notebook again, the one filled with drawings of rockets and stars. And there it was, on the very last page, a maze, complex, symmetrical, precise. Daniel had drawn it at age 6. She remembered showing it to a child psychologist back then, who told her Daniel might be gifted, possibly hyperthymestic, someone with a photographic memory, especially for places and patterns. She hadn't thought much of it at the time, but now, the man in the green scarf. Rachel dug through old photos from the theater's early seasons. Then she saw him, in the background of a staff Christmas party photo, no name tag, just standing there watching. Noah ran the image through facial recognition software he had access to. It took hours, but eventually a name surfaced. Julian Kessler, former stage technician, moved from Bozeman to Colorado Springs in 2013. No public records since 2017. "Could be dead," Noah said. "Or hiding," Rachel replied. They drove to Colorado Springs the next day. Julian wasn't easy to find, but an old theater director recognized the name and gave them a lead, a warehouse-turned-artist commune just outside the city. There, tucked between canvases and half-finished sculptures, was Julian, still alive, still wearing the green scarf. He didn't deny anything. He didn't confirm it either. Instead, he said one thing. He remembered everything. Then, before Noah could ask more, Julian walked out the back door and vanished into the city, gone, just like Daniel. Back in Bozeman, things grew stranger. Kyle, or Daniel, stopped showing up to rehearsals. Jenna said he'd quit. No explanation, no forwarding contact. His backpack was gone. So were his things from the dressing room. Rachel's heart shattered. Again. But the box on her front porch the next morning gave her one more thread to hold. Inside, a tape recorder. And a note. "Mom, I can't come home yet, but I never forgot your voice. I'm sorry I waited this long." Rachel played the tape with trembling fingers. And there it was. Daniel's voice. Older, broken, but real. The recording haunted her. She played it over and over, not because she needed to hear the words, but because she needed to believe the voice. Every syllable was laced with emotion, hesitation, and something else. Coded meaning. Daniel had remembered her voice, that line. The connection they shared. But he'd also said, "I can't come home yet." Why? What was he afraid of? And what did he mean by waited this long? Rachel met Noah in the back lot of the Emerson Playhouse 2 days later. "Something's still missing," she said, gripping the recorder in her hand. "You got confirmation. You got DNA. A voice message. He's alive," Noah replied. Rachel looked at him. "But he's still hiding, and I don't think it's from me." Noah's silence was telling. He had been thinking the same thing. They reviewed everything again, from Victor's testimony to Julian's cryptic message. He remembered everything. At first they thought Daniel had a gift, an unusual memory. But now Rachel realized something deeper. Daniel hadn't just remembered things. He had witnessed something, and someone didn't want him to tell. That night, Rachel returned to the theater one last time. Alone. The building creaked under the weight of time and cold. She walked backstage, past the wall where Daniel's drawing had once hung, past the storage racks and old flats, to the locked office where Jenna kept all the old personnel files. She picked the lock. She didn't hesitate. Inside, a cabinet marked Archive, Staff 2010-2015. She pulled the folders one by one, then stopped. Kessler, Julian, Moore, Rachel, Lanning, Victor, and then tucked behind them all. No label, just a small red folder. Inside, 3 photographs. Daniel, age 7, sitting on the stage. Daniel in the theater's dressing room. Daniel crying in a dark hallway. Attached was a sticky note. "Witness to incident. Keep isolated. Will forget in time." Rachel dropped the file. Her blood ran cold. It wasn't an accident. It wasn't random. Daniel had seen something dangerous. And someone inside the theater, someone she trusted, had tried to make him disappear. She stormed out of the building and drove straight to Jenna's house. Jenna opened the door, robe on, confused. "Rachel? You lied to me." "What?" Rachel held up the photos. "You said you didn't know anything, but you had these. You knew. You knew where he was." Jenna's eyes filled with tears. And then she said the words Rachel never expected. "I did it to protect you." The world stopped. Rachel stepped back. "What are you talking about?" Jenna took a breath. "Daniel saw something the night of the gala. He came running to me, terrified. He'd found a man, one of the donors, in the dressing room with a girl, a minor. It was going to blow up everything, the theater, the school, your job, your name." "I don't care about any of that," Rachel spat. "I know, but I did, for you, for him. The donor had power, Rachel. He threatened us, said if the kid talked—" Jenna looked down. "I panicked. I told Daniel we were going to hide him until it passed. Just a few days. I asked Julian for help. I didn't know Julian would disappear." "I didn't know Daniel would vanish for years." Rachel couldn't breathe. "You hid my son? I thought he'd come back, but he ran. He was scared of all of us." It was betrayal, it was heartbreak, but worst of all, it made sense. Every missing puzzle piece. Daniel's fear, his silence, his coded message. He wasn't hiding from strangers. He was hiding from the people who were supposed to protect him. That night, Rachel called Noah. They filed everything with the police, with CPS, with a lawyer. The donor, Charles Whitman, had relocated to Oregon, but Rachel knew this was bigger than a criminal case. This was about Daniel, finding him, telling him the truth, begging for forgiveness. They traced the audio recording back to an address in Missoula, a youth shelter that operated anonymously for runaways. Rachel didn't wait. She drove 6 hours through snow, through silence, through every version of heartbreak she'd ever felt. At the front desk, she gave his name. The staff exchanged looks, and one of them nodded. Room 8. She knocked. No answer. Knocked again. Then the door opened, and there he was, taller, leaner, haunted eyes, curled hair hidden under a hoodie. Rachel's breath caught. "Daniel?" He didn't answer at first. Then he whispered, "I wasn't sure you'd come." She stepped inside. They sat on the bed, quiet, no embrace. Not yet, just silence. And then Daniel said, "I didn't forget, Mom. I remembered everything, even the lie, even the fear." Tears filled her eyes. "I'm sorry. I didn't know. I swear. I never stopped looking." "I know." He looked at her, really looked. Then finally, after 11 years, he reached for her hand. "I still know your voice." The silence between Rachel and Daniel felt heavier than anything she had ever carried, and she had carried everything: grief, guilt, regret, hope that never died. Now, sitting beside her son in a small shelter room in Missoula, she was afraid to speak. Afraid that any wrong word might undo the moment they were finally in. But it was Daniel who broke the silence. "I thought you knew." Rachel turned to him slowly. "Knew what?" "That Jenna lied, that I didn't run away, that I was hidden." Her voice trembled. "I didn't. I swear to you, Daniel, I thought you were gone, taken. Every day I imagined you needing me, and me not being there." Daniel looked down. "She said you agreed to it." "No, never. I waited for you." Rachel's chest cracked. "I know," she whispered, "and I'll carry that for the rest of my life." They talked until sunrise, slowly, fragments at a time. Daniel told her about hiding in church basements, sleeping on buses, staying with a man in Helena who taught him how to fix electrical wiring in exchange for a cot in a garage. He never used his real name again. He didn't trust it. He told her he never stopped hearing her voice. That line, over and over. "Even the moon waits." It became his anchor, his compass. And one night, 2 years ago, he returned to Bozeman, watched her from a distance, saw the play she directed. He sat in seat H9 because it was the one he always imagined she'd look toward when he was gone. He left the bracelet because he hoped she'd remember. And when she did, when she showed up beside him, it scared him more than he expected, because suddenly he wasn't ready. Rachel asked the question she had feared most. "Why didn't you come home then?" Daniel's eyes welled up. "Because I didn't know if home was still there. I didn't know if I wanted to open a door and find someone else living in it. I didn't know if you still baked that cake on my birthday. I didn't know if I mattered enough." Rachel cupped his face, tears falling freely. "You were my heartbeat every single day." Daniel closed his eyes and nodded once. "I know now." Over the next few days, Daniel stayed silent when they returned to Bozeman. He didn't want to stay in the house right away. Too many memories, too many ghosts. Instead, he stayed in a nearby motel while Rachel met with the police, the lawyer, the authorities. Charles Whitman was being investigated, quietly at first, but aggressively. There were other victims, other testimonies. Jenna resigned from the theater and left town. Noah published the story in full. Bozeman read it with disbelief. One afternoon, Rachel brought Daniel to the old stage at the Emerson Playhouse. Empty, lights dim, dust dancing in the sunlight. He walked to the center and looked up. "I used to imagine you standing right there," he said, pointing to the balcony. She nodded. "I was." He turned, then smiled, just slightly. "I think I want to be here again, on stage, for real this time." Rachel's throat closed. "I'd like that." They rebuilt slowly. No dramatic declarations, no overnight forgiveness. But they did it through moments, through cups of coffee at sunrise, through photos rediscovered together, through the cake she baked, still with peanut butter frosting and crushed pretzels. Daniel laughed when he saw it. "You really made this all those years?" "Every year," she said. "Did you eat it?" Rachel smiled through tears. "Sometimes." Daniel took therapy sessions offered by the shelter. He told his story in pieces. His trauma wasn't something to be erased. It was something to be heard, to be witnessed. One night he sat with Rachel on the back porch. Stars scattered above them like confetti, and he asked, "Why didn't you stop believing?" Rachel thought about it for a moment. "Because the only thing worse than losing you would have been pretending you were already gone." He didn't speak, just nodded, and placed his head gently on her shoulder. 6 months later, Rachel stood alone in the front row of the Emerson Playhouse. The lights had just come up on the final scene of the community's spring production, a play written by Daniel. He had titled it Seat H9, and tonight, on opening night, the entire theater sat in reverent silence. On stage, the final line echoed softly through the audience. "Even the moon waits for the boy who knows her name." And then, curtain. Rachel clapped first, then the rest of the audience followed. Tears streamed down her face, not because of the words, but because of what they meant. Daniel stood backstage, out of view, watching from behind the curtain, just like she had done all those years ago. This time, it was her turn to wait for him. He emerged slowly, wearing a hoodie, this time with his real name stitched into the sleeve. Daniel Moore. They embraced under the spotlight. No words, just light, just truth, just years of silence finally undone by a single moment. After the show, Rachel sat alone for a few minutes before locking up. The theater had emptied. Everyone had gone to celebrate. She walked back to seat H9, ran her fingers along the armrest, then pulled something from her coat pocket, the bracelet, frayed, weathered. She placed it gently on the seat. A full circle, from loss to return, from silence to story. Later that night she wrote a letter. It wasn't for the world. It wasn't even for Daniel. It was for herself. She folded it, placed it in the drawer of her desk, and whispered the last line aloud, not from memory, but from truth. "Even if they vanish, the ones we love leave a trail. And if you listen carefully enough, you'll always hear their voice." Somewhere far from the theater, in a small apartment with a balcony view of the Bridger Mountains, Daniel watched the stars. He didn't need a script anymore, didn't need to hide behind a new name. His voice was his again. And this time, he was ready to be heard.